It's time for the Brouhaha Sports Show. Brouhaha Sports with award-winning sports writer Dale McKee and co-host Marshall Wood. Talking sports with the legends of the game and famous sports personalities. Brouhaha. Now to Marshall and Dale with tonight's guest.
Welcome to the Brouhaha. Dale, looks like the madness may be over with for a while. March Madness, that is.
Yeah, and
you sound like Macho Man Savage over there.
I'm just saying it was a great tournament this year.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very competitive and a lot of great teams, a lot of Cinderella stories there, and just I thought it was a great ending.
Yeah, Coach K made his last tour, I guess, and finished pretty strong with a trip to the Final Four, but couldn't get it done.
Yeah, now think about this. Brett Favre retired and came back, right? Tom Brady retired and came back. But Coach K's got himself in a bind. He's been telling us for a year he was going to retire. Now, what kind of egg would be on his face if he decided to come back, you know? And, but I don't think he's going to come back. He's had a great career. And what's odd about it, I was reading something the other day. He lost to Duke in his final home game.
To NC? To who? He's at Duke.
No, excuse me. He lost to NC in his final game at Duke.
Okay.
A home game at Duke. And he also lost his first game ever to Duke. To North Carolina. Excuse me. You're going to have to come on help me here.
No, man, you know so much.
I had a late
stuff.
night, man. Late night last night.
You on your own. I can't help you. You way past me.
And you know how the weather is today. It's not good. It's not good for thinking. It's good for hiding, but not thinking. And then also he loses his last game ever to North Carolina. So. And North Carolina fans, you look at it like this, man, they got bragging rights forever. Forever.
Yeah.
We made Coach K in the last game, See him now on the Canal Street and Bourbon Street. We beat him in the last game. Yeah.
Let the good times roll, let's say.
Sir.
Oh, man. But like you said, it was a great tournament and, lots of stuff going on, but we got the women's tournament. We'll talk a little bit about that in the final segment. But tell us about the guest you got for us tonight, Dale. You got somebody here?
Well, we got a real interesting guest. She's got a lot of kinfolks in Mississippi, especially around the Laurel area. Her name is Morgan Beagle, and she works for an agency, a sports agency, basically a marketing agency.
Okay.
And right now she's kind of into the NIL. Now the NIL, I'll let you kind of explain it to people, but it's nameless, image, and likeness.
Okay.
And so the college players now are getting into that, and some of them are making some pretty good money.
It's been really intriguing. We've kind of danced around this thing for well, here's our hotlines calling in, man, and we're not taking any calls right now. We're just going to let that ring. But that made me forget what I was talking about.
Now you know how I feel.
Yeah, I know how you feel. But I've been real excited about the NIL, trying to understand it. I'm not, it doesn't matter whether I'm for it or against it, but I've just been trying to understand the process. So I'm really excited about seeing what she's got to say about this, and maybe we'll all be a lot smarter when we get finished. But first, we need to hear from our sponsor, Dale, and then we'll be back with tonight's guest right after the break.
Phillips Building Supply in Laurel, your hometown building supply store since 1954. We are locally owned and pride ourselves on helping our customers find exactly what they need. From foundations to roofs to doors and windows, Phillips has it. For tools, hardware, lumber, and plywood, visit Phillips Building Supply.
Welcome to the show, Morgan Beagle, speaking from Atlanta, Georgia. How are you today, Morgan?
I'm good. How are you guys?
We're doing pretty good, we think. It's hot over here, very hot. About 80, 85, 86 degrees, and, we didn't expect it out of nowhere, but we'll probably get the rain following us. All right, today we're going to talk a little bit about college football and how things have changed, and so we really appreciate your time. And, of course, in the introduction, we introduced everybody to you. So let's just talk about it. How's college football changed? How's it changed in the last year since maybe 2021?
Oh man, that's a loose-ended question. It has Changed tremendously. I think the entire sports industry is going to be ever-changing here forward due to the NIL, the name, likeness, and image changes. It is, it's a great thing for these athletes who, spend a lot of time and effort into perfecting their craft. But the question on, my personal perspective is, what is the damage doing to the viewership and to your fans that's going to drive costs up for collegiate tickets, collegiate gear, anything that is going to in turn have to turn around and pay these college athletes who are now being paid for their name, their number, their jersey, anything like that. It's gonna change it for not necessarily for the better all the way around, but better in certain aspects.
This is Marshall. Morgan, I want to just kind of step in there for a minute and ask a question. This is something I was not aware of. So on the NIL stuff, this is actually being paid for by the universities?
Every university is different. There's not necessarily one specific structure. It's a very, very broad and general introductory piece into paying collegiate athletes that has been started by the NCAA. So some universities have started funds that will pay their student athletes by, a rigorous scale that they set in place that will, differentiate by university and institution. But there is funding coming, out of the cities through the Chamber of Commerce in these towns like Oxford, Mississippi. Their chamber has started a fund for NIL. The universities are now creating specific funds and scholarships. So it's going to completely change the structure of all these universities and their athletic programs.
Wow, I wasn't aware of that. That's good to know.
In your opinion, is it going to make college football balanced or unbalanced? Because after you watch the NCAA tournament, it seemed like we had a lot of experienced teams out there, and it didn't matter if you were a number 1 seed or number 15. It seemed like everybody was pretty level, except maybe a couple of the blowouts early in that tournament. How do you see the other sports like baseball? I know everybody likes football, maybe basketball. What about these sports and these women's sports? Are they going to get in the NIL eventually?
Yes, sir. So there's already some programs and some individual businesses and companies that are seeking to make a more equality-based playing field with the NIL spectrum, including, student athletes that might not necessarily be, that number 1 5-star recruit. They're branching out and incorporating, and I think that's where, these Chamber of Commerce and these subsidiary groups are forming to funnel money into the NIL programs. I think that's where that's kind of formulating, but it's going to just continue to further create these powerhouse schools that become, the quote-unquote untouchables, like the Alabamas, the Texas. It's going to become sports-based. But then, as it is now, but I think down the road, 5-10 years, if this NIL doesn't get more structured, you're going to have one individual school like Texas that has, abundance of money well beyond your lower tier schools like Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's not pulling in the amount of money that, in Alabama is, but their baseball program is phenomenal. But there's going to be schools like Texas that have so much money to offer to student athletes of all kinds in all sports that they're going to absorb all of these recruits because, everyone's going to want to go where they're getting paid the most dollar.
Well, do you, I know the state of California started pushing this back in around 2019 as far as passing the first law. But do you think the federal Congress will eventually get involved in this and try to make it fair for everyone, or do you think they'll just let the NCAA handle it?
I personally believe that at some point there will have to be a government hand in on this because, we're already seeing how out of control it's getting. Being like I said earlier, it's just a gray space. There's not much structure to it. There's not a whole lot of rules. And, for all those Ole Miss fans out there, we can recall back to our times with Hugh Freeze where kids were getting in trouble and losing eligibility and, getting blown up on national TV for just accepting money to pay, mom's light bill, helping their families, not because they want, the newest and fastest car, but just simply to take care of their families. And now it's like a free-for-all where you have schools and companies, that are funneling money to these kids. It's almost in a sense of bribery from my personal perspective, because there's a lack of structure, there's a lack of rules, there's the NCAA is the governing body, but there's not much control they have over it because of the lack of planning that went into this. It was almost that they just said, yes, let's do it, because so many people were hounding for years and years about it, and they didn't put the pre-work into it. And so now it's going to be very hard to backpedal into, restructuring and cleaning it up. So I think that's where the government hand's going to have to come in.
All right, let's say if Alabama, the University of Alabama, and you go into their bookstore or place where you buy jerseys and things like that, they got a Bryce Young jersey there with his number on it. When they sell that jersey, does Bryce Young get some of that money, or is that strictly university money?
He will have to see some of those profits. If you can remember a few years back, a lot of these universities, when you bought a licensed gear from a bookstore, from an authorized dealer, it was just usually a simplex number like a 1, a 0, maybe the year, or a retired number, such as the Mannings in Oxford. Now, this past season in Oxford, Matt Corral's jersey is getting sold at Rebel Rag. Nike is producing a powder blue jersey with his number 2 that says Corral on the back. So because his name, likeliness, and image is a part of that number, that name, that jersey, it's all part of his brand recognition, some of those profits will have to go to him.
Well, what about players that graduate like Archie and Eli and Peyton? Do they get any of this money, or are they strictly the ones that's playing now?
The retired numbers, I'm not quite sure how that is structured through the university with their agreement with, the prospective players such as Chucky Mullins or, all these universities across the country that have retired numbers. That's all, I think, an individual basis set up done through the university affiliates.
I'm going to ask you this, and you may be somewhat repeating yourself with this when I ask you this question. Say for Corral, for example, as long as that Ole Miss jersey's got his name on it, if it's 10 years from now or 15 years from now, if they're still selling Matt Corral jerseys, he's going to get part of that money. Is that correct?
Based upon the contract that he worked with them, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. That clarifies a little bit.
Okay. Well, what about, now how do they get this NIL money? Does it goes to the athletic department, say at Alabama, and then they write him a check, or does he have to have someone like your people at your office?
No, sir. So for NIL, you do not have to necessarily have an agent to represent you. We're, obviously learning that the NIL spectrum is changing the way our industry even works, dealing with professional athletes from the agency side. But the checks are, for their profits or their deals are cut directly to them. These Instagram ads, TikTok ads, Twitter, whatever they're doing, all of that stuff is going directly through them. Even if it goes through an agency, the money is going to these guys. It's not being filtered through the university, which can, circle back to your other question of, is there going to have to be a government hand that eventually steps in because the NCAA is going to be in over their heads? And that's where I think all that comes into play, is you're going to have more so, my concern is these 18-year-olds don't understand how to manage all this money. I mean, you've got guys making $500,000 a year right now in NIL deals who are 18, 19, 20 years old.
That I'm not going to say all of them, but that can be that would have been a recipe for disaster for me when I was 18 years old, I guarantee you.
Right.
Let me ask you this, and I think you've probably, we're talking about, the process. I mentioned that to you earlier, and there's really not one per se, but I guess just to clarify the way this NIL thing works, I'm a football player, and I'm playing high school football. That's part of the recruiting process, or are they signed up even before they might have been recruited, just in case they get recruited? Is there any format to it at all?
So I think this might answer you. Texas is, and there's articles all over the place about Texas, and I keep referencing them because they have, just an extraordinary amount of money that they have donors and companies like Pepsi and Dr. Pepper who are willing to put forth for NIL stuff. So they have, offensive linemen. They have this offer out, and I believe it's $150,000 per offensive lineman who ends up coming to Texas. So they have NIL deals already in place and set up based upon your position or a certain, aspect or characteristic of that player before they even get there. So you show up to Austin, Texas for, May move-in, and you've already got NIL deals lined up.
Wow. Okay, that helps me understand the process. I appreciate that.
All right.
So now, basically, but on the college spectrum, because it's legal per se, these schools are able to help facilitate and get things lined up for these guys before they get there.
Okay.
Wow.
What about Stinson Bennett? He's a former Jones Junior College Bobcat. Made it pretty good. Now, I thought I read something, and you may correct me if I'm wrong, but he's got an agent too. So how does that work?
Yes, so there are agencies. We are one of them. We have NIL clients as well. We don't necessarily sign them to a contract the way you do when they are getting ready to go through the NFL pre-draft process.
Uh-huh.
But it's more so of a management component, someone who reaches out on your behalf for deals, someone who facilitates your deals, those kinds of things, the legwork stuff that these guys don't necessarily want to deal with when they're getting, private messages on social media about, hey, can you, do an advertisement for my product, or would you be willing to make an appearance here for X amount of dollars? So with our specific clients, our NIL guys, we are their filtration system where they pass those contacts on to us, and we kind of handle setting everything up, negotiating, those kinds of things.
Let me ask you this now. So you'll not an agent is probably the wrong word, but you're going to handle an NIL guy. Now, do y'all go out and recruit NIL guys, or do the NIL guys come to y'all?
A little bit of both.
Okay. So you're keeping up with the stats, and you're keeping up what's going on in high school football all around the country. Who's a 5-star, who's a 3-star, and all that kind of stuff. Say, well, hey, we might need to sign that guy. Does it kind of work like that sometimes?
A little bit here and there. More so, our involvement comes once they are already enrolled in their collegiate program. Mm-hmm. That's more so when we get involved, and we obviously, as an agency, we have restrictions in terms of recruiting. Guidelines that we have to follow, certain registrations with the state and both the university. So there's components to that, protection of both the athletes and the agents. But like I said, with this NIL space being open, it's kind of changed that, where you have agents who are already communicating with these guys as freshmen when, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, that might not necessarily been the norm.
I'm kind of all over the board. This is so interesting to me. Now, combining the NIL consideration with the transfer portal situation. Say I'm a guy and I'm playing for the University of Southern Mississippi, and I got an NIL deal, and that's hooked to the University of Southern Mississippi. If I enter the transfer portal, then that deal is null and void, and I'm looking for a new one. Is that correct?
Not necessarily. It may be dependent upon the business itself. Like if, there was a player at Southern Miss that had a deal with the Hattiesburg Walk-Ons restaurant. Yeah. That may not carry over to their next school because it's a location-based endorsement, sponsorship, partnership, whatever that situation is. Yeah. Now, if it's an athlete who's at Southern Miss who is partnered with Celsius energy drinks, and they leave Southern Miss and they go to the University of Arkansas, that can carry over with them because that is not a location-based endorsement, partnership, sponsorship, whatever it is. They can take that with them, and it may even increase their value per se in terms of their, Instagram posts or, their general endorsement price based off of them going to, quote-unquote, a larger school in the SEC.
Okay. I'm going to stop and tell you, you're doing a really good job explaining this. And I got one more. I'm going to hit you again. I'm going to shut up and let Dale talk a minute because I'm just excited about this. Let's go back to the University of Texas. And Texas, we're talking about, they've got the NIL stuff where they're paying the players themselves. Now, so if a player is at the University of Texas and he's one of those offensive linemen that gets that money so much he comes in there to get, of course, he's going to lose that if he enters the transfer portal, correct?
Depending upon how they structure it. I know Texas is one of those schools that I mentioned has created a fund where that money is being put into this quote-unquote scholarship style fund that is then being paid out to the athletes. So it is directed to a specific reason for that donation. But if, if they make them sign a contract, or if that's a part of, their student athlete, amendment bylaws that they sign, because every school you have to sign certain paperwork that may be a part of, your National Signing Day paperwork now, that there's, situationally, more than likely, Texas isn't going to keep paying you if you go and transfer to Baylor.
Right.
So I'm sure there's an addendum in there that's, stating if you do transfer, for whatever reason you are unable to play, if you're kicked off, that they will pull that money.
Okay.
Hey, Morgan, listen, our time is up. We really appreciate your time, and we wish you luck in all your ventures in the past. And I do want to, we said in the introduction that we had a part Mississippi girl down here, so we're very proud of you, and we wish you much success. And thank you for being on our show.
Yes, sir. Thank you, guys. Call me anytime.
Thank you so much, Morgan. We appreciate it. We probably will. We'll be back. It's great stuff. You did a great job. Thank you kindly.
Awesome. Have a good one.
All right, you too. Okay, folks, that's we're going to take us a little break here. Let me see if I can get rid of that noise there. We're going to take us a little break here. Got phones ringing, man. We're just having the best time up here. Got a new phone, don't know how to work it, but anyway, we're going to take a break to hear from some of our sponsors and be back for the final segment after this word.
Phillips Building Supply in Laurel, your hometown building supply store since 1954. We are locally owned and pride ourselves on helping our customers find exactly what they need. From foundations to roofs to doors and windows, Phillips has it. For tools, hardware, lumber, and plywood, visit Phillips Building Supply.
Welcome back, everybody. Well, Dale, the NIL, I think I learned some stuff, about the process a little bit. What are your reflections on that chat we just had?
Well, I think Morgan brought us up to date, so to speak, because it's really still only 2 years into it.
Yeah.
And I think that of the people we've talked to about the NIL and all, and we've talked to about 2 or 3 of our guests since August about it, I think she was the most knowledgeable about it, wouldn't you say?
I would say by far. Of course, she's the one that's on the money end of that deal, so they're the ones they're going to have to ones that have to know. But she did make a comment in there that really struck a chord with me. She said, when all this stuff is kind of like there was so much pressure to do it, and then everybody said, okay, we're going to do it, but they didn't iron out all the issues. I mean, she said that, there's going to be a lot of stuff left to do as this thing forms and people begin to understand the problems with it. She said there's going to be a lot of stuff have to happen. It's going to be like a moving target, so to speak.
Listen, great corporations throw something out at people in certain parts of the country to see what it's going to be. And I think one of the biggest marketing mistakes ever was Coke back in the 1980s. They were going to come out with this new Coke and do away with the old Coke.
I remember that had me all upset.
It had me upset. But I ain't buying that new Coke. I want the old Coke.
Yeah.
Well, finally they had to do away with it, because it just wasn't selling, and they were losing business because they weren't making the old Coke.
Yeah.
I don't know if they brought the old Coke back or not. I don't know what you drink now in Coke at all. But what I'm saying, there was a marketing boo-boo because they didn't really go through it like they said, And I remember somebody told me one time about Dr. Pepper owns all the pizza places, a lot of them, Pizza and Pizza Hut.
Yeah.
And so, they were going to do away with the buffet. And people up in arms, what? That's why I come. That's why I come to your place for the buffet.
Yeah, might want to check that out.
So, I think, it's like she said, people didn't really think through it. We've got to do this. I was going to ask her one question. I would have liked to ask her, and I may just text her and ask her about it, was, do these kids still get their scholarships? Do they still get their, what we call laundry money back in the day when they gave you $15 a month? Or, I know that they're paying players, or, they're giving them so much money, the schools are now to kind of live on, just living money. And so I just think there's a lot of ins and outs of it, but it's opened a can of worms, and you know what? When you open a can of worms, there's a lot of fingers in that can.
Yeah.
And so everybody's trying to make a little money, but it's created jobs too, hasn't it?
Well, yeah.
Morgan's got a job.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So,
that's right. You talk. Did you ever drink one of those new Coca-Colas, Dale?
I think I tried it.
I tried one. I didn't like it.
I didn't either.
But you know, I'm not a big drinker or anything like that. But I'm gonna tell you, I can remember people that used to mix bourbon and Coke.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big problem. I heard people that were bourbon drinkers that like to get, say for example, I'm not going to name a particular brand, but something in Coke. Mm-hmm. Well, when they got the new Coke, that wasn't what they were used to. And I read somewhere where that had a big play in their decision because, there's a lot of Coke served in these honky tonks around the world. Wouldn't you imagine?
Yeah.
You ever been to a honky tonk now?
No, I haven't. My mother's listening. I cannot say that.
Me neither, Miss McKee. I ain't been to one neither. I ain't going. Okay, Dale, let's move on. We got a lot, to talk about the basketball stuff. Let's start with the women. The women wrapped up their deal, of course, before the men did, and we've got a champion. South Carolina women's basketball goes wire to wire. What's that? Wire to wire. I mean, they went from the beginning of the season all the way to the end, ranked number one.
They're a good team, good coach.
Man,
and they have the best players. But I was impressed with Connecticut up to the final ball game. I mean, they have some gritty players.
Well, I'd have to say that as far as women's basketball goes, I go back and I remember what Louisiana Tech had back maybe in the 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. And then I'm looking at what UConn's had. I don't know. I think, UConn probably may be the greatest women's basketball program in history, all things considered. Mm-hmm. And South Carolina certainly right there in there with them. Mississippi State's women's basketball team had a real good run several years ago that lasted 4 or 5 years, and they made the Final Four 2 or 3 times and never could quite get it off. There was always UConn and there was always South Carolina they had to deal with. Man, they got close.
Yeah, I remember one night they beat Connecticut one night on a jumper in maybe overtime and seconds to go, and then they came back a couple days later and Notre Dame beat them on a 3-pointer. But we're talking about Mississippi State, but in the beginning of women's basketball, Mississippi dominated it because Mississippi College and Delta State. Yeah. Delta State won 3 state national championships, and their last championship, who they beat?
Who?
LSU.
Wow.
It wasn't LSU at Ruston or LSU.
It was Louisiana State University.
It was
Tigers.
The Tigers. And so Mississippi's got a great tradition. Yeah. And of course, when Van Chancellor was at Ole Miss was competitive every year. Yeah. And Mississippi State had its run here a few years ago, and I think Ole Miss had a pretty good team this year. Jackson State proved this year that. They only got beat by 2 or 3 points by LSU. Yeah. And at LSU, so, they had a very good team. I think they were 18-0 in the SWAC 2 straight years. Yeah. I don't care what league you play in.
That's good.
You go 18-0 2 years straight, playing at least 9 home games. Yeah.
Listen to this. This is what the Gamecocks went through. Went 14-0 against teams ranked in the Associated Press Top 25 this season, becoming the 8th program to win multiple national titles in NCAA women's basketball history, joining UConn at 11. So there you go.
What conference do they play in?
Who's that? Who?
That team you're just talking about.
South Carolina.
No, I'm just saying. So, where are all the ranked teams?
The SEC, baby. The SEC.
Where are all the ranked teams?
Yeah, the SEC, baby. That's right. Look. Our time's getting on us pretty fast. We got to talk about these guys. Let's talk about that game last night.
Okay.
Tell us about that something?
I'm not going to say I told you so, but I told
but you told me so.
I told you the Final Four would be Kentucky, missed out, Kansas, Duke, and North Carolina.
Yeah.
And
that's why you're the man.
Guess what?
That's why you're the man.
But
so, our champions.
Yes.
Tell us about our champions.
They're pretty good.
They're pretty good. Kansas, the Jayhawks.
Well, now listen. Hey, if you can come back from a 14 or 16 point deficit in the second half in the championship game, I think they went on a 31-10 run one time. Yeah. And that's phenomenal. North Carolina had a 16-0 run in the first half, but them, it was a good college basketball game.
what is it, 4.5 point spread. And I was reading some article this morning about, there was a problem with an inbound pass at the end. It really affected the spread of that thing, so that was pretty big news. But you talk about news, it didn't affect Mattress Mac because he bet the money line.
My Houston furniture man.
That's him. Mattress Mac bet the money line.
If I ever go to Houston, I'm going to go in the store and buy something.
Mattress Mac nets $11.2 million on bets after Kansas beats UNC to win the 2022 men's title. So, old Mattress, he's had a rough at the Super Bowl, had a little loss. He had a little problem with the national NCAA football championship, but he got this one right. But now let's talk. What a great basketball program in Kansas. I want to just give a quick rundown of the college basketball teams with the most national championships as we run out of time. And this is a team that I'm just crazy about. Not taking anything away from our current champions because they're in this list too, but UCLA won 11. They won, listen to this, 1964, 1965, 1967, 1968, 1969, 1970, 1971, 72, 73, 75, and 95. I mean, look at what a run of national championships. North Carolina, Kentucky's got 8, and North Carolina has 6. So and then we come down here to Kansas with 4, but now Kansas has got 5. So coming on.
I'm looking at this: Alcindor, Walton, and Walton.
Yeah, man, yeah.
It's
And the old man,
back in the days,
John Wooden pushing them all the way.
Yeah, back in the days, college basketball was ruled up front. So if you had a good front line, you were going to do really well.
Yeah.
Now it seems like the guards have taken over the game. If everybody plays in 3 guards, spreading the field like they do in football, spread the field and play the whole court.
Yeah. Well, Dale, once again, my friend, this time to go is at hand. Dale and I appreciate everybody out there being with us tonight, and we certainly appreciate Morgan Beagle being with us as well. I want you to remember to check us out on Facebook and at YouTube at the Brouhaha. But for now, it's time to say goodbye, Dale.
Goodbye, Dale.
And we will see you next week for more of the Brouhaha. Take us out of here, Jamie.
You've been listening to the Brouhaha with Dale McKee and Marshall Wood. Heard Tuesday evening, 6 p.m. on WABO. For more of the Brouhaha, follow us during the week on Facebook and WABO.